Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on behalf of International Broadcast Media Television, IBMTV. On our World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about sustainable innovations, and things that we can do to collaborate as a world to build back better and stronger during and after the COVID pandemic. And today is Tech Talk Tuesday, so we're honored to have with us Jay Glasgow to talk about data and privacy and our esteemed guest of panelists. Before I begin the program today, I wanted to, first of all, have an IBM TV moment of silence for Samarla Blackwell, Carly Smith, Jasvinder Kaur, Amarjeet Johal, Jaswinder Singh, John Weissert, Amarjeet Sekhan, and Matthew Alexander. The 8 innocent Americans who lost their lives at the FedEx gun shooting. We've talked about gun violence in America, and today we're going to talk about technology and data and privacy and what we can do to address this disease of hatred and violence, which is spreading across America like a cancer. President Biden is making efforts at the executive federal level, but this might take a community effort and also a collaborative discussion where we're comfortable talking with each other of how we can not only diagnose the problem, but solve the problem and save American lives. On a more positive note, I wanted to end my monologue today with some inspiration. Today, on the Today Show, for the first time in 3 years, we heard from former President George W. Bush, the son of the late former George H.W. Bush, as affectionately known as Bush 40. I think Bush 43, but not 41. And the president today is overseeing a naturalization service for immigrants to America. He's written a book called Out of Many One, and he's also now an artist, so he has many portraits of immigrants. And the president has interviewed and talked to a number of immigrants. We heard this morning from Hamdi Alakwa, the founder of Chobani Yogurt, the inspiration from the Rwandan orphan who has now started orphanages in America and around the world, and the compassionate human story of immigrants who come to America. What I found interesting is that this is a president who won the Republican nomination, but you hear a very different story of immigration from President Bush. President Bush's advice was to us watching the show today was that we're all God's children, that every life is precious, and that it makes it easier for our nation to solve problems if we do it together by at least welcoming immigrants in who want to come to America to work hard. In this president's belief, it makes us a stronger nation. Now, President Bush did say that he thought we needed to reform our asylum system, putting more resources in courts so we could adjudicate cases quicker to keep people in America. He also said we needed to expand work visas because there's a lot of empty jobs in America, and maybe bringing those people in on work permits for a shorter period of time to do the work. But he said at the end of the day, it's about compassion, it's about unity, and it's about the greatness of our great nation. Finally, we mourn the death of Walter Mondale, the former Vice President of the United States, who served at the side of Jimmy Carter. He was a great American servant, and we pray for him and his family. That is my monologue today, but I want to thank President George W. Bush for reminding us that immigration can be something about empathy. It can be about humanity. It can be about compassion. And I know for all of you watching this show, that is certainly something we need more of in the United States of America. On that note, I have an honor of bringing in Jay Glasgow, who's going to be talking about data and privacy. From Down Under, Shaquille Latimer, Rakesh from New Zealand, and Mark Lee, who will be running things for a few minutes as I have to take off, but I'll be back. But I wanted to welcome everybody to the show today. And I'm really sorry for the death in America. We pray for those families who lost their lives so tragically in the shooting in the FedEx. And but before we begin on discussing that and talking for hearing from Jay, I just wanted to get your impressions about President Bush's perspective of immigration and this book that he's written called Out of Many One. I think the president wasn't saying that we don't have a problem of people coming in the border, but I think what he was trying to say, and I forgot to say it in my monologue, is that he said it should be called border enforcement with a compassionate touch instead of illegal immigration, right? So he did acknowledge that there needs to be work done, but perhaps that's the way we go about doing it. So I'll start with Mark Lee just to give you remarks about my opening monologue on immigration.
No, I had actually read that article some time back. I'd actually read it when he wrote it in the New York Times over the weekend. I know he was making comments today, but I actually agree with him. If you think about all of the great folks that have come to the United States and still live in the United States that are immigrants that are doing a lot of great work in a lot of endeavors. I mean, of course, we're here in RTP, and there are a lot of immigrants that are in the medical field doing a lot of work around COVID and around a lot of that research that is going on. And of course, we know there have been a number of immigrants in the sports field, in entertainment, which is some of my passions as well. And of course, we've had great leaders like Madeleine Albright, who is actually one of the folks who he did a portrait of. And I was actually quite impressed with some of President Bush's artistic talents as well. So he's actually got that skill that a lot of folks may not know about. But I have looked at a few of the paintings that he did, including one of Dirk, and I can never remember how to pronounce Dirk's last name. I think it's Nurowitz or something like that, but he's one of the NBA players. So I was quite impressed with a number of the points that he was making, including the fact that dealing with this issue and dealing with a number of the issues does need to be done in a bipartisan manner and in a manner that can get the support, not just of the Democrats, but of the Republicans, of the independents, and just kind of like unify the nation as a whole. And I think that that's something that Biden has been trying to do. And I think that that's something that Bush is supporting him in doing. So I was definitely glad to hear about those remarks that he made.
Fantastic. Rakesh, before we go to Shaquille, what are your thoughts about this issue? About compassionate immigration, border enforcement with a compassionate touch.
Yes, I think it's something which is very laudable, and I think it will also improve the image of the United States, which has taken a little bit of beating when you talk about those unaccompanied children and all that kind of stuff. This kind of thing would be good, and I think it's coming from a former president. It needs to be viewed with great interest.
Shaquille, I see you got a little bit of a smile on your face. Oh, here it comes.
Nobody else except for you. So what I'm doing backstage, First of all, can I just say, obviously it's a great tragedy to the families that lost their lives, people that lost their lives at the FedEx facility, and Walter Mondale. He was a great leader. So sad to see, a chapter of U.S. history closing there. Well, look, compassionate immigration. Is there anybody at all who's on the other side of that argument? Like, is there anybody saying we want, uncompassionate immigration in America? Is that happening anywhere? Again, it's just more of this political nonsense, this political correct, stuff. And it's very easy to look at the people who are at the border because you can see them and say we need to be compassionate towards these people. But what about all the people who don't have access to the border, who are also trying to get into America, who also are coming from, very dire circumstances, who are being pushed to the back of the queue because these people are able to walk to the border? These issues are complicated. I think that, we need to pay attention to human rights. We need to pay attention to what's happening, as Rakesh said, with unaccompanied minors. We've seen some children being thrown over the wall, and that sort of thing. These families are obviously desperate and they want their kids to have a better life. I don't think anybody can blame them for that. But I think we have to have a sensible approach. I do like the fact that George Bush talked about there being some bipartisan solutions here, and it'd be nice to see politicians on both sides stop arguing on ideological points and actually start to do something about real issues that are affecting America.
Thank you so much, Shaquille. Jay, before we go on to the technology, what are your thoughts about this? And then we're going to segue in. I'm going to have to leave for a few minutes, but I'm going to have Mark Lee drive the conversation on technology and guns and data privacy co-op.
Super. We use the word asylum, and that's an interesting word. The definition of asylum is a security, an area of defense where people can go that are in trouble and find safe harbor, right? That is the word asylum. And yet in the 60s, we tore down asylums for mentally ill. Asylum meant something totally different to us during the time of deinstitutionalization. When we use the word compassion with illegal immigration within the same sentence, I get a little curious about that. There's a $1 billion industry in the United States that we documented last week here on this show, where businesses are taking advantage of illegal immigrants that often have an average of $10,000 or more cash in their pocket as they come across the border. I wonder if the definition of compassion is allow them to come across the border and be preyed upon by those $1 billion industry companies freely without intervention. Is that the definition of compassion? What's interesting is when we remove the word illegal from immigrant in the United States, that $1 billion industry leaves them alone. People that come into the country legally largely don't suffer the consequences of the $1 billion predatory industry of terrible immigration lawyers and notarios and paycheck advance schemes and apartment hunters and job finders and everybody that are smiling at the immigrants and reaching out a very happy hand to help them out for a price. And there's not enough talk about the egregious crimes that are occurring that are occurring legally in the United States. I know it's weird to call that a crime, but when you have companies that are fleecing immigrants and taking their last penny with promises that are false, right? That is criminal activity under the guise of legal business. So I really am curious, when we use the word compassion in the same sentence as illegal, are we really being compassionate by turning people free in a country to be preyed upon by these predators? And should we be paying more attention to it? And this dovetails nicely into the conversation about FedEx shootings and dealing with the word asylum and the fact that we don't have any mental institutions anymore. We've torn them all down. So we no longer provide safe harbor and security for people that are mentally ill in the United States.
And Jay, thank you so much. And before I hand it off to you, I'll be back in a few minutes. But we want to. This is a very timely issue, and I think from an immigration perspective, I think it's nice to just make sure the conversation is only about economics or laws, but incorporating where we can come together on a solution. So I'm going to now hand it over back to Jay. And Jay, we look forward to hearing from you on Tech Talk Tuesday on how you can address this issue and make it better for all of us in America. Okay?
Super. Thanks. Yes, absolutely. Have a presentation, maybe, if you can show that. And
yes, I'll do that, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you so much, folks.
Well,
thank you.
And in Steve's absence, I'll moderate the best I can. And I want this to be an engaging conversation, this and the other presentation that we go through today. So feel free to chime in. This is going to be a little different than previous presentations. I want to talk for a moment about digital sociopathy and just sociopathy in general. When we look at the cause and effect, particularly around the FedEx shooting that Steve so eloquently opened the show with, if we look at the textbook of sociopath, what is a sociopath? I remember when I first learned this definition, and I actually learned it from a trial attorney, and I was a bit surprised at the pure definition of it. A sociopath is a person who can harm another person or view harm of another person and feel absolutely no empathy for the pain that the victim is suffering, because they can justify or rationalize their action. That's a sociopath, right? Now, sometimes we cross this up with other definitions of like psychopath, and we think that, a sociopath is somebody who's carrying an axe around, slicing people up. That's a psychopath. A sociopath is a little more in the mind, right? This is a war of the mind, and it's a person that feels no empathy for the pain that they're causing another person because they can rationalize or justify their actions. Let me just pause here and ask the panel: do you have any maybe comments that bubble up as you see this definition?
It sounds like the council culture a lot, the hard left. If they don't agree with you, you're cancelled, you lose your job, you lose everything, you can't exist anymore. And they have absolutely no care or compassion for you whatsoever because they can justify and rationalize their actions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, Shaq, if that's true, and I believe that it is, not just with the left, but also with the right, that people in growing numbers have this ability to, without empathy, cancel the other person out. Right. We've seen it at Thanksgiving dinner at the United States when family members don't talk to other family members for political differences. And for years, they have no empathy for the pain that other person is going through. So I think that's an excellent point.
This may be correct about the hard right, but I'll say, as I've said many times before, this is why libertarianism is so important. The United States was designed as a country that the founding fathers put in motion and set in stone through the Constitution the ability to restrain government so that this doesn't happen, so that you can't have other people impose themselves upon you in this way. So that's why that is so important. That's why I keep telling people I'm not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination.
No, we
and
don't
Mark,
think
you
are.
had a comment.
Shaquille, one of the things I was going to ask, and it actually comes back to the early part of the conversation we were having, and I actually have a conversation about, or a comment about the cancel culture and whether it's a left or right thing as well. But definitely one of the things I was going to say is that the other issue that Steve brought up was predatory lending and all of that. And it seems to me that that is a perfect case of an organization that was being having sociopathic tendencies because of the way that they were treating the, in many cases, the Latin American population, and basically preying on them in the ways that they were going after those kind of lending arrangements that were very unfair and very much along the lines of being sociopathic in my mind, because they definitely were not showing any empathy for the people in that regards. And the other thing I was going to add to Shaquille is definitely, I have said before that definitely cancel culture is very much out there, and definitely there is a lot of liberals and folks in the left that are practicing cancel culture. But actually, you just brought up something, which is the whole thing that there was a lot of people that were doing cancel culture on the right as well in the past. And I can actually think about how a lot of our religious conservative leaders were doing basically what amounted to cancel culture based on your views on gay rights and on trans rights and other kind of rights, because we saw that happen here in North Carolina several years back. It was a very big issue, and a lot on the right side of the politics were the ones that were canceling people in that regard. So you've asked me if I could ever give you an example of cancel culture from the right. That would be my example.
So white Christian conservatives, Republicans, presumably, the nemesis of American society, were going around flaming anti-gay marriage, gay marriage advocates on social media. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they were big time. They were doing that, and they were also canceling them on Facebook. They were defriending them. They were doing a lot of things like that.
There's a difference between defriending somebody and having Facebook shut down an account, or having your thing fact checked, or having Twitter cancel it.
There's a lot of fact checking.
To kind of pull this back to the topic of, I think we're agreeing on a mental argument here. Mm-hmm. What I didn't hear Shaq or Mark interject is that it's the free availability of guns that's causing anti-gay marriage people to go after gay marriage people, right? It's a mental war that's going on, and it's individual.
So
and the question that I have here is, if it's not guns that's causing sociopathy to occur in society around the world, what is, right? And I call this a result of unintended consequences. People that have the right ideas to help other people. They would see an insane asylum. The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came out in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was highlighting for a broader society this idea that people that are mentally challenged are being put in an institution for life, and they're being forgotten. And the institutions were dark, and they were run down, and they were poorly managed, and people were being abused. So the solution in the 60s and 70s was to deinstitutionalize, to say we are no longer going to institutionalize people for life. It was a good intended, well-intended argument with some pretty reprehensible consequences, right? Because some people do need asylum. They need protection, even for life, who are mentally challenged. That there is a segment of population that needs that. And to simply do away with the establishment means that then government officials 10 years later said, hey, we have all these empty beds in these rundown facilities. What are we going to do with this? Let's just close them down because we can save money. We can put the budget somewhere else. So they took money and they redirected it. They closed down long-term facilities. Now, in the 70s and 80s, we saw, what some people could argue an orchestrated cheapening of life. We had Dr. Kevorkian, that was famously going around not just helping people commit suicide, but as the courts proved, he actually killed a person. That was premeditated murder, according to the courts and according to the trial and the justice that was served. So we had this, whether you're looking at before a person is born or when a person is elderly, the value of their life. I've heard politicians say, hey, after you're 86, you have no value in society. There's a cheapening of life, and you could apply this to video games. Al Gore and Tipper Gore in the 1990s went on an open campaign against video game violence, saying that it was cheapening life, right? So we have almost in an orchestrated way cheapened life on many different fronts. And then lastly, today we are seeing just an explosion of supported, fully vetted, vouched for directionality of dividing people up. We want to divide people up. It's this group versus that group. It's this political view versus that political view, this race versus that race. And today in the United States, one of the big volatile arguments is, should we be teaching critical race theory in our public schools? Having been at a big corporation myself at AT&T, I personally sat in on a meeting where a VP told all the white people in the audience that they should feel ashamed for being white, and that if we find ourselves sitting at a table with a bunch of other people that look exactly like we do, we should feel ashamed, right? And it was mind-blowing because I was working in one of the most racially diverse groups, I think, in the company at the time. And we were wondering, where is this coming from? There wasn't a problem, at least not in our group. And yet there was this, very orchestrated planned messaging of you must be made to feel ashamed for who you are. When I grew up in the South, guys, in Huntsville, Alabama, in public education in the late 60s and early 70s, I never heard a teacher ever say that one race should feel ashamed for being a member of that race. That never even came up. So in my life experience, this is something new. So to me, I'm seeing this decade after decade after decade, all of them well-intended. I'll concede that. Every single one of these bullet points, people had compassionate hearts. They felt they were doing the right thing. And yet we are at a society right now to where people can cancel one another. They can kill one another. They can walk into a FedEx or drive into a FedEx parking lot and shoot 8 people, right? And we're saying that it's the prevalence of guns that's causing this. And I'm suggesting today that there might actually be something else behind it. And if we can understand that, maybe we can undo it, right? If these are steps that we have gone through, maybe we can take steps to undo these things. And that's my suggestion for right now. And I have another slide to follow up, but let me open this up for conversation. Questions?
You sort of went, in my view, across a whole heap of things that are not necessarily related. So, like, I know that there were many members of the Sikh community, the Indian community, that were victims of the FedEx shooting. But you also you linked in their guns and critical race theory. I think that these are all separate issues. In my personal view, I don't think I am the new face of Anglo-Saxon conservatism in the world today, but I might be. I don't know. Washington State says that I'm white. But I don't think that any person should ever be made to feel ashamed of their race. And that includes white people. And as I think I said last time when Mark asked me what my concerns are with this type of reasoning, it's that, in my view, society has an obligation, especially, in wealthy countries, we have an obligation to try and help the poorest members of our countries. And I would rather see poor white families and poor black families be helped because of their socioeconomic condition, rather than saying we're only going to help black people and seeing, the rich black children of celebrities in Beverly Hills be helped, and nothing really happened for the poor black families in, say, Durham, as Mark brought up last time. That doesn't make any sense to me. We should be targeting the help where it's needed, and you can't just dice and slice things on race or ethnicity or gender, or sexuality, or any of those other things. They should be arbitrary, and I will always find it very difficult to start judging people on things that I thought we should be colorblind to. It shouldn't matter to us what somebody else's color or religious beliefs are, or any of those sorts of things.
No, you said a mouthful there, Shaq. And one thing I want to highlight, I totally agree with you. These things are disparate. They are not related. When I said orchestrated, I didn't mean that somebody had a 4-point plan here and they've been exercising it for 40 years. But what I am saying is that each one of these things have been planned and orchestrated in and of themselves. And combined, they are leading to this devaluation of other people and vaunting of your own self up based upon some difference, right? And the fact that we don't have a treatment plan for that. When people start going down this path, we have no ability to say, let's diagnose this problem. It's kind of interesting. Just a year ago, the entire world sold away our privacy rights under the 3 T's of test, track, and trace. And we heard people around the globe say we need to test, track, and trace when it came to COVID, right? And because of that, we all signed our privacy rights away. We said, yes, please track me. Please follow me. Please monitor what I'm doing because I want to be safe from this disease. Well, mental disease is a disease, right? Mental disease.
If I can just jump in real quickly and everything, one of the things that I would think would be a perfect example of where privacy was not being used in a good way, because the government actually in this time, and I would argue they still sometimes do this, was spying on the citizens, and I was doing the civil rights movement, and I brought it up on the show before, but a lot of people are very much familiar with a program that was entitled COINTELPRO, where a lot of the civil rights leaders were actually spied on, and in some cases, even some folks would argue part of a movement to have them assassinated as well, but definitely they were spied on. There was no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. Now, whether there was government involvement in the assassinations of some of these leaders, that may be up for debate, but definitely there is no doubt that Hoover and others in the FBI were regularly spying on the civil rights leaders, and in some cases even planning people within those organizations to disrupt organizations as well. So definitely that's one of the things that I think would be a perfect example of where the government went too far over in the privacy category and things of that nature. And there was a book printed in 2006 that I was going to mention, and I don't necessarily believe all of the things that the book said, but it was something that y'all mentioned earlier, which is about white guilt. And that was a book that Shelby Steele wrote, and his argument was actually that the whole concept of white guilt actually did not do any good for the African-American population. And he actually says that it was a disaster for African-Americans, not only failing to produce racial equality, but requiring African-Americans to be grateful for the white bureaucrats who now were in control of their lives and all of that. So like I said, there's some other things within the book that some folks might disagree with and that I may have some arguments with as well. But he was definitely saying that that was a case of white guilt not helping the community at all.
I can't agree with you more. I'm married to a Filipina, and the only time I look at her, all the time when I look at her, I don't see a Filipina. I see my wife, right? I don't see the color of her skin. I do realize she's Filipina as soon as I do something wrong and she starts breaking into Tagalog. I realize, wow, I'm married to a Filipina. But until that happens, I see a human being that I love very much, and it's not about the color of her skin. But when we're looking at weapons that are available to us as not, I don't know that it's the cause of the problem from the previous slide. I think it makes it easier for people to act out in violent ways. But it might surprise people that are watching this. The average shooting deaths in the United States have been increasing since 1982. Now, the reason they don't give you statistics before that is because there were some years before 1982 that they were also very high. So it's convenient to start at a low year and work your way up. But it is going up. We have an average of 55 deaths now in the United States due to mass shootings. But it is interesting in knife killings in the UK, where of course killing somebody with a knife is already outlawed. They had 285 deaths last year from people being stabbed to death. So, if you don't have a gun, you're going to find a knife. If you don't have a knife, you're going to find a club. If you're going to act out and you're going to be a sociopath, you're going to find a way, right? Whether it's physical or whether it's digital. But if we asked a question a little while ago, can we work this problem backwards? Would it be possible for us to work backwards? And just thinking through this for a moment, if all four of those previous bullet points were orchestrated, we'd have to orchestrate. We'd have to, as a society, say we need to address some things here. Do we need to orchestrate a period of valuing all races by diminishing our differences and elevating our sameness? Do we need to orchestrate that, right? The second question is, do we need to promote the value of life across all societies around the world? Do we need to look at not just the unborn and the elderly, but all life as valuable? Do we need to fund long-term state mental health facilities again, right? Do we need to look at asylum, because we're using that word in a positive way now with illegal immigrants? Do we need to go back and refresh that meaning for those that are mentally ill? And lastly, do we want to promote mental health, even institutionalization? And here's a footnote to this before we open it up for conversation. Just a handful of years ago, the VA hospitals in the United States, which are institutions, were appalling. They were run down. They were dilapidated. Veterans were dying. They were being treated very poorly. What it took was an orchestrated effort to turn that around and say, you can fire doctors that are poorly performing. You can fire nurses that are poorly performing. We need to do surveys with the people that we're servicing, to the customers, and we need to make improvements. Today, I'm married to a veteran that would prefer to go to the local VA than a hospital, because she gets better treatment there now than she gets at a hospital. So, are these 4 bullet points things that we should, as a society, look to? And sure, we can talk about gun law also for the end result, but do we need to go back to these source problems as societies and focus on these things?
Can I just very quickly say, just back to the guns for a second, I didn't realize it was only, I shouldn't say only, every one of those lives matter, but I didn't realize it was only 55 a year. I would have thought it was a much higher amount than that, because you hear about mass shootings so frequently. I would have thought there would be a lot more deaths than that. Having said that, sorry, I mean, what is there, like 20,000 suicides by gun each year in the United States? So, I mean, I think that we should be looking at, the total amount of lives lost from any cause. And I think suicide, which is dramatically on the rise, is something that we don't talk enough about. There seems to be a lot of focus on things that have relatively low incidence, even if it sounds like there's a lot more of them happening. Just in relation to this orchestrated period of valuing all races by diminishing our differences and elevating our sameness, to some degree, yes, I think we should try and find commonality. But I don't think actually that we should diminish our differences. I don't think we should diminish our differences between genders either. We are different. And, I don't think that you can have diversity and equality. You're going to have to pick one. And for me personally, I would prefer to have diversity. I'd like people I'd like it to be celebrated that we're different. We have different views, we have different cultures, we have different foods that we like. Like let's just take the same ethnicity. Indians are from India and Indians from Fiji. Our foods are totally different. Not completely. They're similar, but they're different because we have different spices. We have different things. Of course, the Fijian Indians had access to more tropical fruits that they've turned into curries, things like that. These are all great, fascinating things. It makes traveling around the world so interesting because you can explore all these different things. If we're all exactly the same, how boring is that?
Yeah, you've got a valid point. So what I'm hearing you say, Shaq, is instead of critical race theory, we still have race theory, but it's not critical. Is that a valid observation?
Look, I think critical race theory, it's not really about all races. It's about the disparity in how, blacks in America have been treated by the law. And, I fully acknowledge, I think everyone would acknowledge that blacks in America have been treated poorly, as have other minority groups in other countries. But, you can't correct a historical wrong by punishing the children of tomorrow for what happened 100 years ago. I think that we should address some of the things that have led to the inequities, but we don't need to destroy, white children to do it. I don't think that's a very good way of going. And there is a lot of things in Black culture that's worth celebrating. And I think that we should do that rather than tiptoeing around. We should also celebrate some of those white people who were against slavery, who fought against slavery and that sort of stuff, rather than labeling every white person as being somehow a beneficiary of slavery in the United States.
That's valid, Rakesh. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think this is a very, it's one of my favorite themes, that we should view all of us as humans, and that's it. Why do we complicate it by putting flags that this person is from this color, this religion, this country? I'm for a fact that we're all humans on one planet hurtling around in space. The whole theory of race has no scientific base. And
it's the human race, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
you say.
exactly.
Yeah, it's the human race, but it's also about, and it goes back to what Shaquille was
The correct
saying.
word is the human species, and we've just got to understand the unifying effect of science, and let's not waste time on all silly thoughts. Enjoy the planet together. That's what my thought is.
And if I could just add to that, I was going to say part of that is definitely, I kind of agree with what Shaquille was saying. It's about celebrating the differences, celebrating the ways that we are different, and actually enjoying that celebration, going to different things of different cultures. I know that I used to love going fairly regularly to the international festival, because I would get a chance to see a lot of people in different cultures and get a chance to experience what they were all about and things of that nature. My aunt is nowhere near Moravian, but she loves going on Easter to the Moravian services, because that's a chance for her to enjoy that Easter service that is done differently. And she's been doing that now for a number of years, and she thoroughly enjoys going to that. I mean, she goes to her regular our home church over there in Hollister at Pine Chapel most of the time, but I do know that for the last several years on Easter, she has gone to attend a Moravian service. And like I said, she thoroughly enjoys that, and just being among those people, at least for that day and everything, and getting to experience that culture. And one of the other things that I am not a big fan of that we have done sometimes, even in our cities and states, is that sometimes we isolate people into like a certain district or a certain area and things of that nature. And I think that that can be very harmful and everything, that we're going to stick like the majority of the African Americans in Compton, if we're going to stick Native Americans, which I have some of that ancestry in my blood as well, into the reservations, then kind of like isolate them away from the public, then that I have an issue with. And sometimes we self-isolate. I see that Steve's back and everything.
Yeah,
and
with
I've
Steve
seen that
coming back.
and I've seen that that's happened sometimes even within the Indian community. And I've seen it where sometimes, and we see that in Cary, where folks will self-isolate and just kind of like create these own little pockets of their neighborhood, and it's only their neighborhood, and not being as inviting as I think that they should be. But that's just my opinion and everything. But I do know there is also self-isolation.
With Steve coming back, let me wrap up the slides here in this segment, if I may. Steve, I might need to throw that back up.
Yep, I'll take it back up. Sorry.
Sure. Get the panel back up here.
There you go.
So if we were to undo all of these things, if we were to go back and take care of the mentally ill, if we were to able to identify sameness in a positive way, maybe not diminish our differences, acknowledge the differences, but at the same time establish we are all members of the human race. By the way, it might take an alien invasion from another planet to pull us all together. I don't know. But if we were able to go back in time, where would that leave us? It would still leave us with people that go insane and pull out guns and kill a lot of people, right? In 1966, Charles Whitman killed 15 people from a bell tower in Austin, Texas, and then wounded 31 others. And in 1949, Howard Unruh killed 13 people walking down a city street in New Jersey. So this is, even if we go back in time and say we're going to fix all of these ills, there are still going to be people out there that kind of go nuts. Go ahead, Rakesh.
Yeah, Charles Whitman, actually, I just happened to come across his case. He had a tumor in his brain which caused him to behave in that strange way. And actually, in his suicide note, he killed his mother and his wife.
By knife. He
And,
killed them with a knife, right? That was
yeah.
an intriguing
And
point.
Yeah, Jay, I've got a
he
quick
put
question
in
to
his
ask you and
note that
everything
please
when I get a chance.
autopsy my brain because something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
So it is it's tragic that his case was tragic, but I don't know the other gentleman, so I can't
well, there are
comment on
many.
that.
By the way, I just picked two. I didn't have time to list
Yeah.
them all, but
there's
virtually
many.
every single year before 1982, there were mass shootings
Jay,
somewhere.
I do have a question for you, and it actually comes back to something that is dear and to me, and definitely something I care about really greatly, and everything is that a lot of times, if we're going to like reform the mental illness and mental health industry, and I do think that it does need a major reform and all of that, but sometimes mental health and mental illness are tied to creativity. I can't tell you how many great jazz artists also spent some time in a mental in an asylum. I mean, Charles Mingus was one, and there was a number of others as well. And I'm not saying that they didn't have some aspect of bipolar or some aspect of craziness within their lives and everything, but they were committed within those mental health institutions in New York and everything. So I guess my question is, how can we address the fact that sometimes creativity and mental health don't always go together?
Yeah, no, I see your point, and here's the issue: those musicians were great musicians, and some of them were able to find help, and finding help in an asylum. And again, we put a negative term, a negative definition on the term asylum in one case when we're talking about mental illness, and yet we put a very positive spin on it when it comes to illegal immigration. But the word asylum in and of itself is a safe place. It's a place to go to find help. If those institutions are corrupt, if they are run down, if they are poorly managed, we've proven with the VA over the past 5 to 10 years that we can turn things around, right? We can, with effort, we can go in and we can fix the actual problem, which is not the fact that we're institutionalizing a person per se, but it's the fact that the institution is poorly run, right? So by shutting them down and saying, hey, here's what we think is compassion. Our definition of compassion is that if a jazz musician today that is equally creatively gifted also suffers mental illness, let's not give him or her a place to go to get help. Let's turn them loose on the streets, and let's make sure they have lots of available weapons to go do something with. In some cases, that jazz musician today isn't going to become a good jazz musician. Right. So I think your point is a super valid point. If we can go back to the presentation, though, the question about sociopathy as it relates to the digital world, this year we witnessed this. 70,000 people were digitally murdered in February by Twitter. They made it an active, aggressive attack, and they said these 70,000 people no longer exist. Now, when they did that, they totally rationalized their behavior. The people that killed those people digitally said, hey, we can totally rationalize this. And by the way, they had it coming. We have no empathy for any kind of tragedy that we just caused. A famous example in Facebook was a reporter who had his pictures and videos of his recently deceased mother playing with her grandchildren deleted by Facebook because he was covering the Capitol riots, right? Just because he happened to be in the crowd and his face was recognized, they totally deleted him, and they had no empathy for the damage or the harm that they caused. So whether you agree with a person's politics or not, if you totally delete them, you're destroying their digital existence and you have no empathy for it. In the United States, we have arguably more than 10,000 laws on the books against guns. Some people put that number at 20,000. Other people debate whether it's 20,000. I haven't heard a single person debate that it's lower than 10,000. So we have at least 10,000 laws on the books regarding guns. You know how many laws that we have regarding algorithms? None.
None. Wow.
We have none. Right.
And that's actually impacting something else that's going on as well, not just in the corporate world, because you're talking about Facebook and Twitter and a number of those other ones, but it's also impacting a whole nother industry that's out there, because they're within the criminal element. There's a whole lot of folks that are doing various kinds of extortion, and they're doing extortion based on what they're able to get access to of you and everything. And then they might try to extort you based on whatever, whether it's something you said, whether it's something you did, or whether it's whatever, but they're part of that notorious dark web that's out there.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So this leads us to a broader question, which is, if a single person or a handful of people in control and power can look at differences between you and them, and based upon those differences, they can cause you to cease to exist digitally, and we could call that digital murder. Once you get to how many number, what's the number of people that you get to where we start to call this genocide? And are there legitimate, acknowledged characteristics of genocide that we are seeing repeat themselves today? Can we actually go in and say, these are the behavior mechanisms, these are the steps that people take to execute genocide, and here they are today in the digital world? To answer that question, Privacy Co-op funded work by noted sociologist Rose Davis, who's a specialist in the field. And I'm very excited to say that just last night, I got her treatise. It's a 12,000 word serious academic document on data genocide, our minority opinions being murdered online. And she takes a very well-balanced look at this problem. I'm excited about it. It hasn't been published yet, but hopefully by next week on this show, we'll be able to tell people where to go to read it. I think this is going to be groundbreaking work, specifically on the problem that you just highlighted some of, Mark.
Yeah, because that's definitely becoming a major issue and everything just out in the world, just that whole kind of like Facebook security and all of that. And I know even in the music world, a lot of folks are frustrated by the security issue because they might have the rights to the music, but then they don't really have the rights to the music because folks don't want to give them those rights. So I don't know what your thoughts are and how y'all are dealing with privacy as far as our musicians and our other folks are concerned.
Oh, absolutely. You know, that's piracy that we're talking about, and it's still illegal. But what you're highlighting here is a broader problem. And that is, 100 years ago, when a group in power wanted to single out another group and cause them to cease to exist from the planet, the only way that they had to do it was to murder them, to physically kill them and end them. And what many of those people in power discovered was that eliminated them from the work pool. They were no longer slaves. They were no longer serfs, right? You could no longer leverage their industry. So, we saw it in Germany in World War II that they would segment some of that population and put them in factories to work and not kill them off, whereas the vast majority they would kill off. In this case, what are we doing? We're talking about groups of powerful elites killing off digitally people's ability to exist, and yet allowing them to live, to continue to go to work, make money, purchase items. We want them to be good consumers and go out to Walmart and buy more products and keep all of these industries in power and continuing to make money. This could be more reprehensible. It's killing a person digitally and leaving them alive to continue to be a slave, right? So it's a very dark point, but one that we should shed some light on.
This has been an engaging conversation, and we've had a number. Kimberly Calhoun has sent a bunch of messages, and I apologize. I've been attending the U.S. Senate hearing that Dr. Rawls is speaking at, so we're so honored at IBMTV. We had him as a guest, and he's actually testifying before the United States Senate on workforce training. So it's exciting for North Carolina. But she's go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, if I can just interrupt you really quickly. I was just going to mention that I saw that Kamala Harris was in town, and one of the things that she really emphasized, which I know Mr. Riles would be very happy about, was the need for community college and technical training. So that was one of the things that when she came to town yesterday, she was very much enthusiastic about, and she actually went to one of the community colleges. It was actually the one over there in Greensboro at Guilford Community College. But I know that that's one of your passion projects, is definitely around community colleges and trade schools, and us not just depending on the 4-year school. So I was just going to say that that was something that went on yesterday, and that she was definitely promoting very heavily in addition to the infrastructure stuff.
So, yeah, absolutely. Well, Jerry, thank you for that presentation. We're going to take the last 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Senator Casey,
Shaquille? Shaquille?
Looks like Shaquille was saying he's having some network issues and he keeps going in and out. So I think that's what's going on with Shaquille.
Well, Kimberly brought up a couple of questions. I'm so apologize, Kimberly, for not seeing it in the chat. I've been, but the first question she asked is, you know, we talked about the digitally murdering people and everything, but what is the underlying reason? Is there some other underlying reason of why we're seeing so much gun violence in America? Or do we just think it's the fact that we're seeing it more because it's reporting through the media more than what we normally would see? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, in the presentation that we covered earlier, we covered, really 4 different elements of societal evolution where, Steve, we had deinstitutionalization happen in the 60s and 70s where well-intended people saw the decrepit conditions of mental health facilities and said, let's jump to the conclusion that people that have been diagnosed with mental illness, none of them need to be institutionalized. And that was just simply a flawed decision where, we said from now on, we're not going to institutionalize people. The second element of this was closing down long-term state facilities for mental illness. That happened in the 70s and 80s. So if you number one, say that people do not have a condition that needs long-term solutioning, then there's no reason to fund long-term solution facilities. So you completely shut them down. So the compassionate view was just turn these people loose in society and let them fend for themselves. Much like the compassionate statement about illegal aliens being just turned loose in the United States interior to fend for themselves against predators. The word asylum means something totally different when we talk about illegal immigration versus mental health. And it shouldn't, because the word asylum means a safe harbor, a place to go to get help, right? And if those institutions are corrupt, we need to fix the corruption and not necessarily tear them down and say they're no longer going to be facilities. This coupled with the third point that we made, Steve, was that there's been a systematic cheapening of life in the United States, whether it's, as Al Gore and Tipper Gore pointed out in the 90s, the violence in video games and popular music, whether it's your arguments about life before the baby is born or when a person is old and they're over the age of 86 and you say that they no longer can contribute to society. All of these things and more, we've had a cheapening of life in general. And then lastly, we have this social direction that we looked at during the course of the show, where there seems to be a heightened view on divisiveness, on identifying what our differences are and denigrating certain groups of people. So if you combine all of these things, you end up with a sociopathy, right? A world where people can harm one another and feel no empathy for that harm whatsoever, because in some way they can rationalize their actions. That's the very definition of a sociopath.
Hey, Jay, just really quick, I know we got to get ready to wrap up and everything, but a couple of things I was going to say that you just made a statement about is, one, anybody that thinks that folks in their 80s, and I'm a little ways away from that. I'm got to push near 60 in a year or two and everything. But anybody that thinks that folks in their 80s doesn't still have a lot to give to society, they need to go meet my dad and some other 80-year-olds that I know, because they are still very active in their 80s, including some readers at the company that I grade at, Measurement Incorporated, because I know there's some readers in their 80s, and my dad is still very active in his art in his early 80s. So definitely, I'm of the opinion that there is a lot of life left in some of these folks in their 80s and 90s and all of that. So just to let folks know that I think that a lot of these folks, maybe back in the day when the life expectancy was a lot less, that might have been the case. But I think we can still have folks having a lot of many years of life left and many years of great productivity, even in their 80s, and I would argue their 90s as well. But definitely that was one thing I was going to share. And then Kimberly was asking, and this comes to a privacy matter, about the prisons, because she was saying how a lot of our prisons, unfortunately, have gone to private enterprise now. And definitely that is very true. And that has impacted that industry, the prison industry, because they're no longer government run. They're now like run by private corporations, and that can be in some ways a disaster in terms of particularly those prisons that are having hardly any reform, and in some cases having whole safety issues that are going on in those things, as we've been finding out through COVID, and definitely some other folks that have lost their lives, not even related to COVID, based on the way that they were dealt with in their medical and other type things that were happening within the prison system.
I think it's a very valid point. In college, when we started, looking at different disciplines, and we said, hey, maybe I'll go into law, or maybe I'll go into criminal justice. A lot of friends of mine, including, and myself, we took a criminal justice course, and we were shocked at how much we learned about prisons. I was like, wow, is this all we're going to study this semester is about prisons? But it's a fascinating world of sociological study to look into. And there are some things that governments do well when it comes to prisons, and there are some things that governments don't do well. I think that there might be solutioning in a public-private combination of things, right? But just like we pointed out about the problems of corruption with the insane asylums, you have corruption in the prisons. We had corruption in the VA. I would like to hold the VA up as the model of what a government can do when they put their mind to it, right? When you put your mind to it, you can improve institutions like the VA, even corrupt ones, right?
So yes, absolutely. So we're about to close out. I want to thank everyone for attending. Tomorrow, first of all, the Chauvin trial, the jury is meeting today. So by tomorrow, we don't know whether we're going to be talking about the verdict. I don't know if there's any predictions real quickly in 10 seconds of what you think is going to happen with the Derek Chauvin. And maybe we can do that real quickly before we leave. And we're going to tomorrow, we're going to be continuing our discussion as we approach Earth Day, just on climate change, innovation. I'm wearing my green tie today in honor of Earth Day coming up, and talking about sustainability. And we want to pray for those families who lost loved ones.
Oh yeah, definitely want to pray for them. I'll be surprised, to answer your question, Steve, if we can get in the verdict today, because I'm thinking that the longer it takes, the longer it goes out, the longer it's going to take for the verdict. So, like I said, I'm actually thinking maybe Wednesday or Thursday, just because they didn't do it in the first day. So that's just my prediction and everything. Coming back to something Jay said, I definitely agree that there have been some great reforms within the VA. The VA still has some work to do, though, because I have some friends that are working within the veterans activities. And actually, a friend of mine does a whole, we haven't done it in the last year or two because of COVID, but he was doing a whole activity around veterans and veteran support that was actually done as a talent show of all things, but he was using that as a platform to put out veterans issues. And there is still a lot of things that need to be reformed within the Veterans Administration, including some things that are not the best statistics that they have going on. And some of those statistics are still active, even though I will agree with you, Jay, there has been reforms, but more reforms need to be done.
Rakesh, any predictions? And Kimberly brought up a good point online that, the social media sites might be affecting the trial. But but what are your thoughts about what may happen in the U.S. with Derek Chauvin?
I really, from what I've followed of this case, it seems to be that there are a couple of experts who seem to think that it's that the policeman didn't cause the death, but from my understanding, none of those experts are willing to subject themselves to that kind of pressure on the neck. So I think I don't know what the jurors will decide. I'm hoping they'll make a decision that is with justice, and I hope it doesn't cause any violence. That's all.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we've run out of time. We thank you for ending on that note. We will find out, hopefully by tomorrow. We don't know. People are on edge about violence in America. It's been a great show on World Edition, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk about innovation, climate change, and continued discussion of Afghanistan's the pullout of Afghanistan. Once again, we pray for the family of former Vice President Walter Mondale, for serving his nation as the vice president with President Jimmy Carter. And Jay, thank you as always for a very informative session. Thank you for your patience today, as I had to multitask as a public official, but we'll be back tomorrow for another wonderful edition of World Edition. Thank you so much, and we'll be back tomorrow morning.